Hello and welcome to another KT video, another Voices of the Diaspora podcast episode. I'm your host, Dilemahos Grigoriadis, and today we're going to be discussing Nikolaos Plastiras. Okay, so Nikolaos Plastiras is a very important figure for Greek history, for modern Greek history especially, and I think that it's good to discuss his life. This will likely be the first of a series of videos, probably, on Plastiras. He lived a very important life, a very significant life. He is definitely very important for modern Greek history, the history of Greece of the 20th century, especially. So, this is going to be just sort of a general overview, I guess, of his life. And then in the future, we could do more of a deep dive onto more specific things in regards to Plastiras' life. But, in general, what we see with people, we see that throughout history, there are men whose lives contain an entire century within them. Okay, men who ride through wars, revolutions, exiles, political struggles, triumphs, defeats. Okay, men who become legends. Okay, and that's Nikolaos Plastiras. Plastiras is a national hero. Okay, that's really the point. I'm just gonna be. I think I'm gonna be more real in this video. Whenever the camera turns on, I kind of I put on like a, not on purpose, but I accidentally kind of put on a face where I'm like, oh, the camera's on, I got to act a certain way. And I think I lose my personality. But I just posted on my personal account, some of you maybe read this, I just posted an article. And one of the things I said was that we're always putting on masks and everything's a mask. So I'm not putting on a mask. The mask is off, okay, for this video. So I'm just going to be myself for this. If you don't like it, that's unfortunate, I suppose. But Plastiras, for the Greeks, is a very important figure. He's a folk hero, ultimately. He's a folk hero. To other people, not so much. The Turks called him Karabiber, which we'll get to later, the black pepper. But to the Hellenes, Plastiras was Mavros Kavalaris, the black rider. He fought in nearly every major conflict Greece experienced during the first half of the 20th century. He overthrew the king. He lived in exile. He became prime minister 3 times. And he sought to heal our nation after it had been torn apart by the Civil War. When he died, he left behind neither wealth nor fortune. After decades of public life, he died in poverty. And we see that with a lot of important figures. Often, they're not recognized for their greatness in their lifetime. They are forgotten, they're not appreciated, and they die probably feeling like the loser. Plastiras, maybe, I don't know what was going on in his head. Maybe deep down inside, he felt like the loser. But today, we have statues of him, and we remember him as Greek patriots. We remember him, and we honor him. And God willing, he's in paradise with the Lord. So Plastiras was born on November 4th, 1883, in Kartitsa, Thessaly. His family originated from Vounesi. He grew up in a period where the Greek state was still relatively new. As we've talked a little bit about on this podcast already, Greece began its fight for independence. Well, really began its fight for independence in 1453. But for our purposes, we mean 1821. But as we've talked about before, the Greeks had been struggling for independence for centuries, for all the time during the Turkocratia, while they were under occupation from the Turks, the Greeks were fighting for independence for the 1400s, the 1500s, 1600s, 1700s, 1800s. They were always fighting. They never accepted slavery. So finally, in 1821, they begin to get free, and by 1830, there's an independent Greek state. So Plastiras was born in 1883. This is only a few decades later. This is not a long time after Greece's independence. And at this time still, many lands inhabited by Greeks remained outside the Kingdom of Greece. Macedonia was still under Ottoman rule. Iberos was still under Ottoman rule. Asia Minor, which contains some of the oldest and most prosperous Greek communities in the world, was still under Ottoman rule. So in 1904, Plastiras entered military service, which he could not have known probably what he was getting into. He could not have known that this was going to be the beginning of a career that would place him at the center of nearly every major Greek conflict for the next few decades. So, as a young officer, he distinguished himself during the Macedonian struggle and in the Balkan Wars. The Balkan Wars transformed Greece. The kingdom doubled in size. Macedonia was liberated. Thessaloniki was taken for the Greeks. But there was costs as well. Many people died fighting in the struggle. Many people sacrificed their lives, and not just their lives, but just everything. As I've also said before in another of our videos, the Greeks that fought in the Macedonian struggle gave all to Macedonia. So it was during these campaigns that Plastiras, especially during the Battle of Kilkis Lachanas, Plastiras earned the nickname the Black Rider. Stories spread about him. He's like this, he's this fearless warrior in battle. He appears where the fighting is the fiercest, and he leads the troops to victory. It's like a legendary. It's like a folklore. He's like a folk hero. A legend has been born, we can say. And so Plastiras, at the same time, also became a supporter of Eleftherios Venizelos. So he was a Venizelist. Venizelos was a very important Greek figure in Greek politics of this time period. He was prime minister. He was very significant for Greece during World War I and also after that. They call him a liberal, but it's important to understand what exactly that means, because liberal in the early 20th century Greece does not mean the same thing that it does today in the American context. Completely different. It's better understood in other terms that we can perhaps would be a good episode for another time. But what's important for our purposes in this discussion is to remember that Venizelos was still patriotic. He still believed himself to be doing what he thought was best for the Greek people. So liberal means something different in this context. So it shouldn't be understood in any other terms for the modern day. Venizelos, he was an expansionist. He was the one who led Greece in the Greco-Turkish War, the Asia Minor catastrophe. That was Venizelos. The Megali Idea, to try to fulfill the Megali Idea, that was Venizelos. So, and I know maybe I sound like a Venizelos, which I'm not necessarily. There's a divide which is relevant to Plastiras' life. There's like a divide between the Venizelist and the monarchist. And I wouldn't personally call myself either, because I think that there were good people on both sides. And I think that for the purposes of today, Greece in the 21st century, it's important that we understand that history, but ultimately that's of the past. Ultimately, having like some kind of weird divide like that is not really beneficial to the Greek people. And I think most people would agree with that. I don't think that's that controversial. I think the majority of people don't think in terms of if they're a Venizelist or a monarchist. So That's, for the most part, something of the past, but an important past that needs to be remembered. So I'm going to take a sip of water. The First World War divided Greece because there was a conflict between King Constantine and Venizelos, and this becomes known as the National Schism. King Constantine was sort of neutral, a little bit pro-German. Venizelos wanted to ally with the Entente, and so this caused a divide. This caused great strife among the Greeks. Plastiras stood firmly with Venizelos. So World War I happens, and I talked about recently about the state of Thessaloniki, which some have argued was sort of a early 20th century Greek nationalist state. It can be viewed as, and it's complicated. Some people in the comments were mad that I would dare to say such a thing about the state of Thessaloniki, but I think that they were missing a lot of the nuance with this period, and it's sort of irrelevant to an extent whether Venizelos was making a wise decision. I think some people were saying that it was bad for Greece to be divided during the time of World War I, but that's sort of irrelevant in my opinion, because it's not a question of, is this good timing? That was not the question. The question was the state of Thessaloniki an example of a national state? That was the scope of the question, which a lot of the evidence seems to say that that's an accurate statement that you can make. But either way, that happens. The First World War happens, and the Greeks are seemingly promised Constantinople. They seemingly are given they're supposed to have help from the West. They're expecting it, and so the Greco-Turkish War begins, and Greece invades Asia Minor and attempts to take back Anatolia. Ultimately, this fails, but Plastiras was involved. Plastiras was there. Plastiras was fighting. And also around this time as well, the Russian Empire collapses and the Bolsheviks seize power, and the Russian Civil War begins. The civil war between the Reds and the Whites, or the communists and the anti-communist, or the monarchist or czarist. And in 1919, Greece joined the Allied intervention in southern Russia. Plastiras was placed in command of a very famous Evzone regiment, the 542 Evzone regiment. Forgive me, I don't know how to pronounce out loud some of these military numberings, so forgive me for that, but it's 5/42 Evzone regiment, however you would say that out loud. I've never been a huge military person. It's cool, obviously. I think the aesthetics and stuff are cool, but I'm not going to pretend that I am an expert on military stuff. But so that's what he's part of. And Plastiras was a very effective, powerful warrior, very inspiring leader. He improved the morale of the soldiers, and they became one of the most effective Greek formations in the theater, in the fighting, in this battle, in this war. And eventually, Plastiras commanded a larger force consisting of Greek battalions and French units. This formation became known as the Plastiras detachment. But ultimately, the campaign itself ended in failure. The White Russian cause collapsed. Many of the Russian czarists had to flee Russia and went into exile, becoming like this Russian diaspora. That's where Rokor comes from. And the communists took over. They took over Russia at this time. After the murder and martyrdom of Saint Tsar Nicholas II and his family, the Romanov family. They're saints in the Orthodox Church. But interestingly, Plastiras' regiment had close contact with Cossack cavalry units. The Cossacks are a part of the greater Russian culture. They're these pretty cool, pretty interesting horseback riders and among other things. And so their close contact led to many of them acquiring horses and learning mounted tactics. So, that's pretty cool. And then, like I was mentioning a little bit before, the Asia Minor campaign. This was an attempt to fulfill the Megali Idea. All these ancient Greek cities of Asia Minor were going to be united with the Greek state. That was the dream. That was the idea. And so Plastiras fights in this. They advanced deep into Anatolia. They captured towns, held difficult positions. They developed reputation. The Turkish nationalists under Mustafa Kemal Ataturk and among others, where they were fighting as well against them. And this is when Plastiras comes to be known as Karabiber, which means the black pepper. And also at this time as well is when the Greek, Armenian, and Assyrian genocide takes place, which is something that still to this day the Turkish government denies. But millions were killed, millions lost their homeland, including my own family, including the families of many people that I know, the effects of which are still felt today, because this is land that our ancestors lived on for millennia, that now we've been pushed out of and can't return. People still to this day, there is a culture of hate towards the native Anatolian populations. If a Greek or an Armenian tries to visit certain places in Turkey, they can be mocked, they can be harassed, they can be spit on if you're wearing a cross, things like that. Very, very unfortunate, but that's the current reality. So Venizelos loses the election of 1920, and many Venizelist officers were removed. But Plastiras, despite being a Venizelist, many of his own soldiers were royalists, and they identified so strongly with their commander and respected him so much that they remained in place. They stayed loyal to him. And that really, I think, is a testament to who he was. Because the divide between the Venizelos and the royalists was a strong divide. I mean, there was civil conflict because of it. And yet, Plastiras' own soldiers, who were royalists, respected him so much that they still stayed with him, despite this difference. So that, I think, says a lot about the relationship that he had built with his own men. But ultimately, the Greek advance stalled, the campaign dragged on, and the catastrophe comes. August 1922, the Greek front collapsed. The army retreated. Smyrna was burned. Smyrna was an important city on the west coast of Asia Minor. One of the most important Greek cities, actually, we could say, of the modern times and of recent history of the past few centuries. Smyrna was burned. Many were killed, including martyrs. We have martyrs in the church that were killed. St. Chrysostomos, for example. So there's the catastrophe. Millions and millions of refugees pour into Greece. And in September 1922, Plastiras joined Colonel Stylianos Gonatas and other officers and launched a military revolt. They rapidly gained support. King Constantine I was forced to abdicate, and the revolutionary forces enter Athens almost unopposed. And according to Penelope Delta is an important Greek author from this time period. She also had a romantic relationship with Ion Dragoumis. And when she, According to her, she wrote that when the crowds cheered for Plastiras upon his arrival, he apparently said, "Why do you cheer? We lost. We came destroyed." So quite a poetic, romantic moment, maybe. But they take over. There's the trial of the Six, one of the most controversial events of the period. Several prominent royalist leaders were convicted and executed for their alleged responsibility in the Asia Minor disaster. This is also a very complicated and controversial topic that maybe we could get into at another time. Still to this day, these executions remain debated. So, but you can go and read about that yourself. It's its own total, a whole episode could be dedicated to that. So, so that happened, and then in 1924, Plastiras stepped aside, and the National Assembly declared him worthy of the fatherland. For many Greeks, as we're seeing, he was becoming and had become a living symbol of patriotism. So this republic that Plastiras helped to create seemed to be unstable. There were coups, counter-coups, economic difficulties, conflict between Venizelos and royalists, dictatorships, etc. So Plastiras, even as a national hero, was not immune to persecution. He suffered persecution during the dictatorship of Theodoros Pangelos, who was the grandfather of the more recent Theodoros Pangelos, who was a Greek politician. In 1933, Plastiras attempted another intervention, another coup, and the attempt failed. And Plastiras fled into exile in France. So this is an interesting side note, or maybe not side note, because actually it becomes important later in a sort of unexpected way, maybe, or maybe expected, but it becomes important later. Plastiras, while he's in exile in France, begins to observe the political evolutions, I guess, of Europe. Around this time, as any probably lover of history would know, in Europe around this time, liberal democracy appeared to be in a crisis. Communism was advancing. Now that the communists had taken over in Russia, they were gaining more power, and there were fears, genuine fears of communist revolutions in many European countries. And so authoritarian movements and regimes were beginning to pop up around Europe. And so according to historian George Souvlis, Plastiras became interested in aspects of the Mussolini model and questioned whether parliamentary systems possessed the strength necessary to confront revolutionary threats. And this pretty much reflects a broader trend, a broader European trend during the interwar period. Most people, unless they're interested in this topic, are not really aware that pretty much every European country had some type of broad European nationalist, sort of authoritarian, sort of culturally right-wing but economically left-wing, either regime or party or movement or philosopher or whatever. Pretty much all of Europe had that. They didn't take power in all countries, but they did take power in a lot of them, more than maybe is expected by maybe the average person who doesn't know about this history. So many people at this time became interested in these movements. Plastiras was one of them, and that will become important later. We'll see in a second, because we're going to get into it. But we'll put that on hold. So just remember that Plastiras was interested in broadly fascism, specifically Mussolini's model, which was not a crazy thing to say at the time, because a lot of people thought that. Churchill thought that way as well, which a lot of people don't know. They would expect, with Churchill being on, obviously, the Allies, Mussolini on the Axis, their enemies, so it's unexpected. But Churchill said before the Second World War, Churchill said that he thought that Mussolini's model was probably an example for the future. So a lot of people thought this way. So it wasn't, before war, before atrocities and things like that. It's not, it's a different thing, what people were saying. So Plastiras wasn't being weird or anything. This was kind of a thing that a lot of people thought at the time. So obviously, eventually, usually it's dated in 1939, although that's debatable, but typically that's where we place the start of the Second World War. Some people would say it starts in 1936, especially Hearts of Iron 4 players. But even outside of that, because the Spanish Civil War is in 1936, that's when it begins. And some would argue that that's really the start of the Second World War. But regardless, Second World War begins. Greece is invaded by the Axis. Greece is invaded by Italy. And then later the Germans come in because the Italians begin to lose. Plastiras remains in exile. He remains in France. He actually, I believe, was in what's called Vichy France, which is the sort of Axis-aligned fascist France, to put it simply. Plastiras was living in that and communicated with the government actually to try to get letters sent to Greece. But from France, Plastiras criticized the leadership of Greece. He criticized Metaxas. He criticized the king. He basically blamed the Greek government for getting Greece into the war, which sounds probably strange. And if you think that sounds strange, lucky for you, Plastiras wrote a whole letter, and we have the whole letter, and you can go read it, and you can maybe see why he said the things he said. I'm not going to read the letter, the whole thing. Maybe in the future we could examine it more closely, but he criticizes it, and this causes him trouble later. But this is what he does. He criticizes the leadership and basically blames the Greek government for what happens. But in Greece, resistance movements begin to emerge, both of the left and the right, communist resistance and nationalist resistance movements. One of them is Eves. They were sort of a Republican, again, not in the like American sense, but in the Greek sense, Republican resistance movement, anti-fascist resistance movement. And Plastiras was sort of declared their symbolic leader, even though he wasn't actually there, even though he wasn't fighting. He was considered to be their leader. And so this fighting happens. Eventually, the Axis lose the war, and the Germans retreat from Greece. But the conflict does not end there, because Greece goes into civil war. And in 1945, Plastiras becomes prime minister. He's allowed out of exile. He becomes prime minister. And the British allow this, but they distrust him because of his sympathies. And Plastiras attempts to navigate between competing forces. There's an agreement signed during his premiership, but his government only survives for a few months. So, and actually he gets into trouble because of the letter that he writes. It gets published in a newspaper, and then people begin to make accusations against him that he's fascist and all these different things, and it causes him issues. But that comes not immediately after. He founds a party, the National Progressive Center Union, which basically he was preaching national reconciliation. Because Greece was divided between the left and the right because of the Civil War. The Civil War was brutal. People don't even know about the Civil War in Greece, how brutal it was. It was very, very terrible. And basically it happens, and he serves as prime minister from 1950 and 1951 and 1952, and he attempts this national reconciliation. And his government promotes reconstruction, economic recovery, social reforms, different various things. Um, but it seems, in general, that Plastiras, even whether he was right or wrong in different things, he seems to have been unselfish. He seems to have been sincere. That's what observers have said about him. So that seems to be a reputation that stays with him in regards to his legacy. One of his lasting achievements is Lake Plastira. In the 1920s, he envisioned creating a reservoir in the Tavropos River to control flooding and assist development in the region. But after the Second World War, he revived the proposal while serving as prime minister, and he died before construction was complete. But the project did eventually become a reality, and today there is Lake Plastira. It provides water, electricity, irrigation, tourism, etc. So by the early 1950s, Plastiras' health was failing, which is to be expected probably after years of war, stress, and political struggle. He lost the elections of 1952, and in July 26th, 1953, Plastiras died in Athens at the age of 69. And like I said at the beginning, he died poor, despite decades at the center of public life. He accumulated little personal wealth, which is, just think, I think today we have an idea that like politicians are rich, both in like in Western countries, we kind of see things that way. I mean, I don't know. Can you just think off the top of your head of like a Western leader that doesn't have money, that's poor? I don't know if there's really just like an immediate example that somebody would think of. But Plastiras, despite being prime minister multiple times, was not just like some rich guy wasting his wealth. And this, I think, again, is a testament to who he was. That he gives all his life to Greece and the Greek people. And what does he get out of it? He didn't get personal wealth. He got trouble, actually, in many ways. I mean, either on the battlefield, because, at any moment he could be killed. Politically, he gets into trouble, so he was sent into exile. So, but despite all of that, he remained loyal to the Greek people, it seems. So he reposes. His funeral was conducted with the honors of a prime minister. Both his political opponents and supporters paid tribute. One newspaper reflected that whatever mistakes he had made, it would be difficult to deny his patriotism, his courage, and personal honesty. And years later, his preserved heart was transferred to Gardica, covered by the Greek flag and accompanied by church and state officials. So that's kind of an overview of who Plastiras was. A controversial figure, I think. Still to this day, beloved by many Greeks as an important folk hero. Probably not without his controversies for the obvious reasons, as we talked about. But an important figure nonetheless. And I think, he is someone who every human being has flaws. No one has ever lived and had all the right ideas every time, 24/7. And some people don't like him because they're royalist, or because they don't like him because of the way that he blamed the Greek government for being invaded by Italy. Maybe some people think that's a ridiculous thing. But I think it's good to look at a person's life on the whole and try to just observe who they really were and really ultimately where they were going. what direction their soul was pointed in. Were they going towards Christ or were they going towards Satan? And maybe not even think of it that way, because that's sort of dualist in a way, isn't it? Because it's not like we don't believe, as Orthodox Christians, this is kind of a tangent, but an important one, I think. As Orthodox Christians, we don't believe that there's like two gods and one is Christ and one is Satan and they're like equal and they're fighting each other. That's not what it's like. Christ is God and Satan has zero power. He's just some creature that's trying to cause annoyances, basically. So maybe we can't even think. Maybe it's just, was Plastiras pointed towards Christ or was he not? Was he trying to grow closer to Christ? And that's the way that he should be judged, I think. That's the way that all figures should be judged. And did they do the best of what they could with what they had? Because not everybody is born into the same places in life. Some people have an easier time with things than others, right? So you have to find people where they are and meet them where they're at, where they were at, and see them like that. I mean, even it's said that even Ataturk, his wartime enemy, someone who's at the complete opposite side of him, reportedly praised him and said, "I gave gold, you gave me copper." I don't know what that means, to be honest. But that's what he said. So there's that. But that's kind of an overview of Plastiras' life. I hope that I got everything right. If I made any mistakes with my historical research, forgive me. If hopefully I was entertaining enough to keep you people watching to the end. I know people nowadays have bad attention spans, unfortunately, and so do I sometimes, But Plastiras is whether you love him or hate him, he's important. Love him or hate him, he was a significant figure for the Greeks, which is true. It's true, regardless of anything else. So there's that, and let us know in the comments your thoughts. Talk about Plastiras. Be respectful to each other. If people disagree in the comments or wherever, be respectful to each other. And and if there's any specific things, anything that we talked about today that people want to learn more about in depth, let us know in the comments, and maybe we can study that more in depth. Or if there's a different topic or anything else, feel free to comment on that. And I guess that's it. That's it. That's where we'll end for today. God bless. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.